The old warrior walked slowly across the stage. His forelegs clicked against the polished floor with each careful step. Commander Krickstahl had served the Galactic Coalition for over 60 years. He had fought in 12 major wars and countless smaller battles. His hard shell bore the marks of plasma burns and blade cuts. But none of those wounds bothered him as much as the memories in his mind. The assembly hall of Velthos Prime War Academy was filled with young cadets. They came from a dozen different species across the galaxy. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few were made of living crystal. All of them looked at Krickstahl with respect and excitement. They expected to hear stories of glory and triumph. They expected to learn how great warriors won their battles. They did not know what was coming. Krickstahl reached the center of the stage and turned to face the young officers. His compound eyes moved across the crowd, studying them. So young, he thought. So eager to prove themselves. They reminded him of himself many years ago, before he learned what true fear meant. "You have come here to learn about war," Krickstahl began. His voice was rough like gravel scraping against metal. "You have studied tactics and strategy. You have trained with weapons and learned to command troops. But today I will teach you something your instructors cannot. Today I will teach you about humans." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. The cadets looked at each other with confusion. Humans were known throughout the galaxy as friendly traders and skilled engineers. They made good music and told interesting stories. Why would a legendary war veteran want to talk about them? Krickstahl saw their confusion and felt a grim satisfaction. "I see you do not understand. Good. That means you have never faced them in battle. That means you have never seen what they become when they are pushed too far." He pressed a button on his wrist device and a holographic image appeared behind him. It showed a small blue planet with white clouds and green landmasses. Earth, the human homeworld. 63 years ago, the Galactic Coalition made first contact with humanity. They had just developed faster than light travel. By our standards, they were primitive. Their ships were slow and poorly armed. Their soldiers used simple projectile weapons. We thought they would be easy to control. Krickstahl paused and let out a sound that was his species' version of a bitter laugh. We were fools. The hologram changed to show images from human history. Wars fought with swords and shields. Wars fought with guns and bombs. Cities burning. Soldiers charging into certain death. The cadets watched in growing horror as the images continued. Before humans ever reached the stars, they had already fought 2 wars that covered their entire planet. Millions of their own kind died in these conflicts. They developed weapons capable of destroying whole cities in a single blast. And then, when the wars ended, they rebuilt everything and continued living as if nothing had happened. A young cadet near the front raised a tentacle. "Commander, why would any species fight such destructive wars against itself?" Krickstahl nodded slowly. "That is exactly the right question. And the answer is what makes humans so dangerous. They fight for reasons we cannot always understand. Territory, resources, ideas, pride, things that seem small to us can drive humans to incredible acts of violence." The hologram changed again to show Coalition military records. When we first recruited humans into our forces, we assigned them as support troops. We thought their aggression would be useful against the Drexar horde, but we did not trust them with important missions. That changed at Outpost Sigma 7. The image showed a small military base on a rocky moon. It looked unremarkable, just another Coalition outpost on the frontier. I was stationed at Sigma 7 as a junior tactical officer. Our commanding officer was a Volante named General Morvax, a good leader by Coalition standards. Careful, methodical. He always calculated the odds before making decisions. Krickstahl's voice grew quieter. Then the Drexar came. 300 ships against our 40. General Morvax was killed in the first assault. Half our forces were destroyed before we could organize a defense. The survivors retreated to the underground bunkers and prepared for siege. The old warrior's eyes seemed to look at something far away, something the cadets could not see. Coalition protocol was clear. When facing overwhelming odds with no chance of relief, surrender was the logical choice. The Drexar would take prisoners for exchange. Lives would be saved. There was no shame in it. He turned to face the cadets directly. But our new commanding officer refused to surrender. Her name was Lieutenant Commander Amy Shaw, a human female, small even by their standards. She had a soft voice and smiled often. When I first saw her take command, I thought we were doomed. I thought this weak creature would lead us all to pointless deaths. Quickstall made the bitter laughing sound again. I was wrong about many things in my youth, but I was never more wrong than I was about Amy Shaw. The hologram displayed an image of a human woman in military uniform. She had light brown hair cut short and calm gray eyes. There was nothing remarkable about her appearance. She looked like she could be anyone's neighbor or friend. Shaw gathered the surviving officers in the command center. There were 12 of us from 6 different species. She looked at each of us in turn and asked a simple question. She asked if we were willing to fight. Quickstell remembered that moment like it was yesterday. The fear in the room had been thick enough to taste. Everyone knew what fighting meant. It meant death against impossible odds. I told her that fighting was illogical. I told her that surrender would save lives and allow us to fight another day. I told her everything my training had taught me about acceptable losses and tactical wisdom. The old commander's voice dropped to almost a whisper. She listened to everything I said. Then she smiled at me. Not a mocking smile or an angry smile. It was kind, almost gentle. And then she said something I have never forgotten. The assembly hall was completely silent. Every cadet leaned forward, waiting. She said that where she came from, people did not calculate acceptable losses when their friends were in danger. She said that surrender was not something humans did well. And she said that if the Drexar wanted to take Sigma 7, they would have to pay for every inch of ground with their own blood. Quickstell straightened his old body and looked out at the young faces before him. That was the day I began to understand what humans truly are. Not the friendly traders you see in spaceports. Not the smiling diplomats in your council chambers. Those are the faces they show when they are at peace. He let the words hang in the air for a long moment. What I saw over the next 43 days was something else entirely. What I saw was humanity at war. And I promise you, young ones, it was the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed. The cadets sat in stunned silence as Quickstell prepared to continue his tale. None of them smiled anymore. None of them looked eager. For the first time, they understood that this lecture would not be about glory, that it would be about fear. The siege began on what humans called a Tuesday. Quickstell had never understood why humans divided their time into such small pieces. But he learned during those 43 days that they used these divisions to track their suffering. Each day survived was a victory. Each night endured was proof of strength. Lieutenant Commander Amy Shaw wasted no time after taking command. She divided the survivors into teams based on their skills rather than their species. This was unusual for coalition forces, who typically kept different species in separate units. Shaw did not care about tradition. She cared about survival. Quickstell found himself assigned to work with 2 humans. The first was a young medic named Danny Cortez. He was barely 20 years old by human counting, with dark hair and quick hands. The second was a demolitions expert called Pete Vasquez, an older man with a thick beard and steady eyes that never seemed to blink at first. Quickstell resented being placed with these strange aliens. His own species, The Vanthari were proud warriors with a long military tradition. Working alongside humans felt like an insult. But Shaw had given orders, and there was something in her voice that made even proud Vanthari obey. The first week of the siege tested everyone's limits. The Drexar attacked in waves, probing the defenses and looking for weaknesses. Shaw positioned her troops carefully, making sure no position was ever left unguarded. She slept only 2 hours each night, spending the rest of her time walking among the troops and checking their morale. Crickstel watched her during these rounds with growing curiosity. Coalition officers typically commanded from safe positions, far from the front lines. Shaw was different. She visited every post, spoke with every soldier, and remembered every name. When supplies ran low, she gave her own rations to wounded troops. When ammunition became scarce, she helped carry crates to the 4 positions dot by the second week. Respect for Shaw had spread through the entire garrison. Even the most skeptical aliens began to trust her judgment. She had proven herself not with words, but with actions. The Drexar changed their tactics on day 14. Instead of direct assaults, they began using artillery to slowly destroy the bunker complex. The constant bombardment shook the walls and filled the air with dust. Sleep became impossible. Nerves began to fray. It was Pete Vasquez who came up with a solution. He had been studying the base's industrial facilities and found stores of mining chemicals that could be combined to make explosives. Working with Danny Cortez and several alien engineers, he created a new weapon from nothing but scraps and determination. Crickstal helped them build these improvised bombs. As he worked alongside the humans, he began to notice something strange about them. They made jokes. Even in the worst moments, when death seemed certain, they found reasons to laugh. Danny would tell stories about his family back on Earth. Pete would describe the restaurant he planned to open when the war ended. They spoke of the future as if they truly believed they would live to see it. How can you laugh at a time like this? Cricksdale finally asked them one night. We are surrounded by enemies. We have no hope of rescue. Logic says we will all die here. Pete looked at him with those steady eyes and smiled. That's exactly why we laugh, friend. If we're going to die, we might as well enjoy the time we have left. And if we're not going to die, then why waste time being miserable? Crickstal did not understand this reasoning. It went against everything his species believed about proper warrior behavior. But he remembered it, and he thought about it often in the years that followed. Day 31 brought the worst fighting of the siege. The Drexar had finally gathered enough forces for a major assault. They came from 3 directions at once, overwhelming the eastern defenses before anyone could react. Cricksdale was stationed at the western wall when he heard the alarm. By the time he reached the eastern sector, the fighting was already brutal. What he saw there changed him forever. Private first. Class Hannah Brooks was a young human woman who had been assigned to guard a secondary tunnel entrance. She was not a large person or a particularly skilled fighter. She had been a communications technician before the siege began, pressed into combat duty only because every warm body was needed. When the Drexar breached her position, Hannah was hit by plasma fire that burned through her left arm. Coalition training said she should signal for medical evacuation. Coalition doctrine said wounded soldiers should be removed from combat to preserve their lives. Hannah did neither of these things. Instead, she braced herself against a broken support beam and continued firing with her remaining arm. Cricksdale watched in shock as she held the tunnel alone for 7 minutes, killing 9 Drexar soldiers before her weapon overheated and failed. Any Coalition soldier would have retreated at that point. The position was lost. Further resistance was pointless. But Hannah did not retreat. She drew a knife from her belt. A simple blade of metal, primitive by galactic standards. And she stood there, bleeding and swaying on her feet, waiting for the next Drexar to come through the breach. "Come on," she said. Her voice was weak but steady. "I'm not done yet." Reinforcements arrived moments later and drove back the Drexar. Hannah collapsed as soon as the fighting ended. Danny Cortez rushed to treat her wounds, working frantically to save her life. When Crystal asked why she had not retreated, why she had risked everything for a position that was already lost, Hannah looked at him with confused eyes. "My friends were behind me," she said simply. "If I ran, they would have died." She spoke as if this explanation was obvious, as if any other choice was unthinkable. Crystal had seen bravery before. He had seen soldiers fight against difficult odds, but he had never seen anyone treat their own survival as less important than the survival of others. Among his species, self-preservation was the highest instinct. A soldier who died uselessly helped no one, but humans did not think this way. To them, dying for others was not useless. It was the most meaningful thing a person could do. Amy Shaw promoted Hannah to sergeant the next day. The young woman accepted the rank with quiet pride, her wounded arm wrapped in bandages. She returned to duty 2 days later, refusing to stay in the medical bay while others fought. The siege continued for 12 more days. Each day brought new horrors and new examples of human determination. Crystal watched them fight through injuries that would have disabled any other species. He watched them share their last food with strangers. He watched them comfort dying comrades with gentle words and steady hands. When Coalition reinforcements finally broke through on day 43, they found a garrison that should have been destroyed. By every tactical calculation, Sigma-7 should have fallen weeks earlier. The defenders had been outnumbered, outgunned, and cut off from all support, but they had not fallen. They had held, and at the center of it all stood Amy Shaw, exhausted and wounded, but still giving orders, still smiling that gentle smile. She had lost 30% of her forces during the siege. Coalition generals called it an acceptable loss ratio. Shaw called it 32 friends she would never forget. Crystal was awarded a medal for his service at Sigma-7. He accepted it with mixed feelings. He had survived, yes. He had fought well by Coalition standards. But he knew in his heart that the real heroes were the humans who had taught him what true courage meant. He never forgot the lessons of those 43 days. And he never looked at humans the same way again. Crystal paused in his lecture and reached for a glass of water. His throat was dry from speaking, but more than that, he needed a moment to prepare himself for what came next. The stories he had shared so far were difficult, but they were also stories of victory. What he had to tell now was darker. The cadets waited in respectful silence. They had stopped taking notes several minutes ago. Some of them looked pale, their natural colors faded by the shock of what they were hearing. Good, Crystal thought. They should be shocked. They should understand. After Sigma-7, I requested transfer to a human combat unit, he continued. My superiors thought I was crazy. Why would a promising Venthari officer want to serve with aliens? But I had seen something at Sigma-7 that I needed to understand better. I needed to know how humans could do the things they did. The hologram behind him shifted to show a new world. Centauri 4 was a rocky planet with thin atmosphere and red dust that covered everything. It had been a Coalition mining colony until the Drexar captured it in the 3rd year of the war. I was assigned to the Liberation Force for Centauri 4. That is where I met Sergeant Major Carl. Done. An image appeared of a large human male, with a shaved head and deep lines around his eyes. He was not smiling. His face looked like it had been carved from stone, hard and cold and completely without warmth. Dunn had been fighting the Drexar for 6 years when I met him. He was considered one of the most effective soldiers in the entire human military. His record showed over 200 confirmed kills. He had received every medal his people could give him. Quickstyle let those numbers sink in before continuing. But what made Dunn special was not his skill with weapons. It was what had happened to him before we met. 3 months earlier, his entire squad had been killed in a Drexar ambush. 14 soldiers, all of them his friends, dead in a single day. A young cadet raised a claw. "Commander, was he the sole survivor? How did he escape?" "He did not escape," Quickstall answered. "He was on leave when the ambush happened. He was not there. By the time he returned to his unit, there was nothing left but bodies." The old warrior's voice grew heavy with old pain. Among the coalition species, a soldier who experiences such trauma is immediately removed from duty. We have programs to help them process their grief, counselors to guide them back to mental health. Many never return to combat at all. This is considered proper and humane. He shook his head slowly. Dunn did not request leave. He did not ask for counseling. Instead, he went to his commanding officer and requested immediate reassignment to the front lines. When asked why, he gave a single answer. He said he had work to do. The hologram showed video footage of Dunn in combat. He moved through battlefields with terrifying efficiency, his weapons always firing, his body always advancing. There was no hesitation in his movements, no fear in his eyes. He fought like a machine built for one purpose. I served alongside Dunn for 18 months. In that time, I watched him volunteer for every dangerous mission available. He learned the Drexar language so he could interrogate prisoners. He studied their tactics until he could predict their movements. He became obsessed with understanding them, with knowing everything about the enemy that had taken his friends. Quickstall turned to face the cadets directly. One night, I asked him why he pushed himself so hard, why he took such risks, why he did not allow himself to rest or grieve. The assembly hall was completely silent. He looked at me with those cold eyes and said something I have thought about every day since. He said that the Drexar had made a mistake when they killed his squad. They had thought that killing his friends would break him. Instead, it had freed him. He no longer feared death because he no longer cared if he lived. All he cared about was making sure the Drexar paid for what they had done. Quickstall let those words settle over the young officers. This is something humans call spite. It is a motivation that most coalition species do not truly understand. It is the desire to cause harm to an enemy, not for any practical purpose, but simply because they deserve to suffer. It is hatred refined into purpose. A Volanthi cadet near the back stood up. "Commander, this sounds like mental illness. Surely this soldier needed medical help, not more combat." "By your standards, yes," Quickstall agreed. By human standards, Dunn was functioning exactly as intended. Humans have a long history of channeling grief into violence. They have names for it: vengeance, retribution, justice. These are not considered diseases among humans. They are considered virtues. The hologram shifted to show a memorial wall covered in names. Hundreds of them. Thousands. All soldiers lost in the frontier wars. Dunn survived the war. He is still alive today, retired on a small farm on Earth. I visited him once, many years after our service together. He showed me a room in his house where he keeps pictures of every soldier he ever served with who died. There were over 200 photos on those walls. Quickstall's voice grew soft. He told me he wakes up every morning and looks at those faces. He told me he has never forgotten a single name. And he told me that on the day he dies, he will meet them again and tell them that he kept his promise. The old commander turned back to his audience. "You see, young ones, humans do not fight like we do. We fight for territory, for resources, for survival. These are logical motivations. We can calculate when fighting is worthwhile and when it is not. We can surrender when the odds are against us because surrender is logical. He raised one of his manipulator arms and pointed at the memorial wall still displayed behind him. Humans can fight for logic too, but they can also fight for things that cannot be measured. Memory, honor, love, the promise made to a dead friend. These motivations do not fade when the odds turn bad. If anything, they grow stronger. Quickstyle walked slowly across the stage. I have seen humans continue fighting when any rational being would have stopped. I have seen them take wounds that should have killed them and keep moving forward. I have seen them sacrifice everything, including their own lives, for people they barely knew. He stopped and faced the cadets again. And I have seen what happens when humans decide that an enemy must be destroyed. Not defeated, not pushed back, destroyed. When they reach that point, they do not stop until the job is done. They do not negotiate. They do not compromise. They simply continue until there is nothing left to fight. A crystalline cadet spoke up, its voice like chiming bells. Commander, you speak of humans as if they are monsters. But we have met humans. They seem kind, friendly. How can they be what you describe? Quickstall smiled, though his face was not built for the expression. That is the most important lesson I can teach you. The humans you meet in peacetime are not pretending. Their kindness is real. Their friendship is genuine. They truly want to live in harmony with other species. He paused and let his voice drop low. But underneath that kindness is something else. Something ancient and dark that sleeps quietly until it is awakened. Humans spent thousands of years fighting each other before they ever reached the stars. They survived ice ages and plagues and wars that killed millions. The ones who lived were the ones who could be kind in peace and terrible in war. The old warrior straightened his body and looked out at the young faces before him. Never forget this truth. The friendly human trader in your spaceport could become a deadly warrior if you threaten what he loves. The gentle human mother playing with her children could kill you without hesitation if you endangered her family. They carry both natures inside them, always. He let the silence stretch for a long moment before speaking again. Carl Dunn taught me that humans are not cruel by choice. They do not enjoy causing pain. But when someone forces them to fight, they fight with everything they have. And they do not stop until the fighting is truly over. Quickstyle looked at the memorial wall one last time. The Drexar learned this lesson the hard way. By the end of the war, they feared humans more than any other species in the coalition. Not because humans were the strongest or the most advanced, but because humans were the ones who would never, ever give up. He turned off the hologram and faced his audience in the dim light. That is the nature of human persistence. That is what makes them the most dangerous species in the known galaxy. And that is why you must never forget what I am telling you today. The lights in the assembly hall dimmed further as Quickstall prepared to share his next story. He could see the cadets shifting in their seats, some of them clearly wanting to leave, but too disciplined to move. He understood their discomfort. These were not the stories they had expected to hear. These were not tales of glory and triumph, but they were true. And truth was more important than comfort. I have told you about human courage and human persistence, Quickstall said. Now I must tell you about something else. Something that even I struggle to understand, even after all these years. The hologram flickered back to life, showing a star map of the frontier region. A red dot pulsed in an asteroid field near the edge of Coalition space. The 5th year of the war was the darkest time for the Coalition. The Drexar had pushed us back on every front. Our supply lines were broken. Our fleets were scattered. Many believed the war was already lost. He pointed to the red dot. Intelligence discovered that the Drexar had hidden a command vessel in this asteroid field. This ship controlled all communications for 3 sectors. If it was destroyed, the enemy would be blind and confused for months. It could change the entire course of the war. The hologram zoomed in to show a massive alien warship surrounded by spinning rocks. It was heavily armored and protected by dozens of smaller vessels. The problem was simple. The asteroid field was too dense for large fleet movements. Any attacking force would be torn apart before reaching the target. And even if a ship got through, the Drexar reinforcements would arrive before any rescue could be mounted. Quickstyle's voice grew heavy. Coalition Command called it a suicide mission. They looked for volunteers, but made it clear that whoever went would not be coming back. Most commanders refused to even consider it. The price was too high. The hologram shifted to show a human destroyer, sleek and silver against the black of space. Letters on its hull spelled out a name in the human language. The Valiant Sun, a destroyer-class vessel with a crew of 112. Their captain was a woman named Louise Grant. An image appeared of a human female in her middle years, with gray streaks in her dark hair and eyes that seemed to look straight through the hologram into the souls of everyone watching. There was no softness in her face. She looked like someone who had seen too much and carried it all inside her. Captain Grant had been fighting since the first day of the war. She had lost 2 ships before the Valiant Sun. She had watched friends die in numbers that would break most beings. But she had never stopped fighting, never stopped believing that victory was possible. Quickstow paused and took a slow breath. When Grant heard about the mission, she volunteered immediately. But she did not volunteer alone. She gathered her crew and told them exactly what the mission would mean. She told them they would likely die. She told them there would be no rescue. She told them to think carefully before deciding. The old commander's voice cracked slightly. Every single member of her crew stepped forward. 111 humans looked at their captain and chose to die beside her. A murmur ran through the assembly hall. The cadets looked at each other with expressions of disbelief. Such a thing was unheard of among coalition species. No commander would ask their crew to die. No crew would agree to such a request. I was serving on a carrier nearby when the Valiant Sun departed. I watched them go into the asteroid field. I listened to their communications, and I have never forgotten what I heard. The hologram began playing audio recordings, translated into common galactic language, but preserving the original human voices underneath. Captain Grant's voice came first, calm and steady. All hands, this is the captain. We are beginning our approach. Remember what we trained for. Remember why we're here. And remember that whatever happens, we do this together. Then came other voices. The chief engineer, a man named Marcus Bell, reporting that the engines were running at full power. The navigation officer, Kim Tran, calling out course corrections as they weaved through the spinning rocks. Weapons officers and damage control teams and ordinary crew members, all speaking in calm professional tones as they flew toward certain death. Quickstow let the recordings play for several minutes. The cadets listened in absolute silence as the Valiant Sun pushed deeper into the asteroid field. They heard the crew report damage from rock impacts. They heard wounded people refusing to leave their posts. They heard Captain Grant encouraging her people with quiet words of pride and love. Then came the moment that haunted Quickstow's dreams. That Marcus Bell's voice crackled through static. Captain, the reactor is failing. We've taken too much damage. We have maybe 10 minutes of power left. Kim Tran responded immediately. I have visual on the target. Distance is 12 kilometers and closing. There was a pause. Then Captain Grant spoke, and her voice was the calmest thing Quickstow had ever heard. All hands, this is the captain. It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve with you. Now let's finish what we started. Helm, running speed. The recording ended with the sound of the Valiant Sun's engines roaring to full power. Then silence. Quickstow turned off the hologram and faced his audience. Many of the cadets had tears streaming down their faces, or whatever their species used instead of tears. Some were trembling. A few looked like they might be sick. "The Drexar command vessel was destroyed," Crickstall said quietly. "The valiant sun struck it at full speed. The explosion was visible from ships thousands of kilometers away. 112 lives ended in a single moment of fire." He walked slowly across the stage. Coalition Command called it a strategic victory. The death of the command ship threw the Drexar into chaos for months. Our forces were able to regroup and launch counterattacks. Many historians believe it was the turning point of the entire war. The old warrior stopped and turned to face his audience. "I have studied military history across 43 species. I have read accounts of battles going back thousands of years. And in all that time, I have found only one species that has a word for what the valiant sun did." He spoke the word slowly, carefully, giving each syllable its proper weight. "Sacrifice. Humans call it sacrifice. The willing choice to give your life so that others might live." A Volante cadet raised a trembling appendage. "Commander, surely other species have similar concepts. Parents protecting children. Soldiers dying for their homelands. These are common across the galaxy." "Yes," Crickstall agreed. "But there is a difference. Among other species, such deaths are tragedies. They are mourned as losses. We build memorials to remind ourselves of the cost of war." He pointed at the empty space where the hologram had been. "Humans build memorials too, but they also celebrate these deaths. They tell stories about them to their children. They name ships and buildings after the fallen. They treat sacrifice not as a tragedy, but as the highest form of heroism." The old commander's voice grew soft. "I asked a human scholar once to explain this to me. She told me that humans believe there is no greater love than to give your life for your friends. She said that every human who chooses to die for others becomes eternal. Their name lives forever. Their example inspires others to be brave." Crickstall shook his head slowly. "I still do not fully understand this belief. Among my people, a dead warrior cannot fight again. A dead life cannot create new life. Death is always a loss, never a gain." He looked out at the young faces before him. "But humans see it differently. To them, a life given willingly for others has infinite value. It is worth more than victory. It is worth more than survival. It is the purest expression of everything they believe." The assembly hall was so quiet that Crickstall could hear the cadets breathing. "Captain, Louise Grant and the crew of the Valiant Sun are remembered as heroes by humanity. Their names are taught in every human school. Their story is told whenever humans gather to honor their warriors. They did not die in defeat. They died in triumph, and their triumph echoes through the generations." Crickstall straightened his old body and gave the formal salute of his people to the empty air where the hologram had shown the Valiant Sun. "I never met Captain Grant, but I honor her memory. I honor all of them, because they showed me what humans are willing to pay for victory. And it is a price that no other species would even consider." Commander Crickstall stood in silence for a long moment. His old body ached from standing so long, but he barely noticed. The memories he had shared weighed on him far more than physical pain ever could. The cadets waited, sensing that he had not yet finished. They were right. "The frontier wars ended 30 years ago," Crickstall finally said. "The Drexar horde was broken. Their homeworlds were occupied. Their military was disbanded. Peace came to the galaxy, and with it came a new era. The hologram activated one final time, showing scenes from modern galactic life. Human traders laughing with alien merchants in busy spaceports. Human diplomats sitting on the Galactic Council beside representatives from 100 species. Human families raising children on colony worlds. playing games and building homes and living ordinary lives. "Look at them," Crickstall said softly. "Look at what humanity has become. They are artists and scientists. They are teachers and builders. They create music that makes other species weep with joy. They tell stories that spread across the galaxy. They are our partners, our friends, our allies." He let the peaceful images play for several minutes. The cadets watched humans helping others, healing others, working beside others. There was no sign of the warriors Crickstall had described. These were gentle people, kind people, the sort of beings anyone would want as neighbors. "It would be easy to forget," Crickstall continued. "It would be easy to look at these smiling faces and believe that the stories I have told you are exaggerations. Ancient history from a war that ended before most of you were born. Easy to believe that humans have changed, that they have become soft, that they are no longer capable of the things I have described." The old commander's voice hardened. "Do not make this mistake." He turned off the hologram and walked to the very edge of the stage, bringing himself as close to his audience as possible. "I visited Earth 3 years ago. I wanted to see the human homeworld for myself. I walked their cities and traveled their wilderness. I met ordinary humans living ordinary lives. And I saw something that confirmed everything I had learned during the war." Crickstall paused to gather his thoughts. "In every human city, there are memorials, statues of warriors, walls covered with names of the dead, museums filled with weapons and uniforms and flags stained with blood. Humans do not hide their violent history. They display it proudly. They teach it to their children. They remember every battle, every war, every sacrifice." He looked out at the young officers. "I asked a human child, perhaps 10 years old, why these memorials were so important. She told me that her people never wanted to forget what they were capable of. She said they kept these memories alive so they would always be ready." The assembly hall felt colder somehow. The cadets sat perfectly still. "Ready for what?" I asked her. And this child, this innocent young being, looked at me with eyes far too wise for her age. She said they were ready for anyone who threatened the things they loved. Anyone who hurt their families. Anyone who tried to take their freedom. Crickstall made a sound that was his species' version of a sigh. She was 10 years old, and she already understood what I had spent decades learning. Humans carry both natures within them, always. The gentle friend, the terrible warrior. They can switch between these natures in a heartbeat when necessary. He began pacing slowly across the stage. "After the war, I stayed in contact with Amy Shaw. We became friends, as much as two such different beings can be friends. I visited her on Earth many times. We talked about the war, about peace, about the future of our peoples." The old commander stopped pacing and faced his audience. "On my last visit, 2 years ago, I asked her a question that had been bothering me since the siege of Sigma 7. I asked her how she had found the strength to keep fighting when everything seemed lost. How she had kept her soldiers motivated through 43 days of horror." His voice grew quiet. She smiled at me. That same gentle smile I remembered from the command center all those years ago. And she told me something I will remember until the day I die. The cadets leaned forward, desperate to hear. She said that humans had spent thousands of years fighting each other. Every weapon they had ever built, every tactic they had ever developed, every strategy they had ever created, all of it had been tested against the most dangerous opponent in the galaxy, themselves. Crickstall let those words hang in the air. Think about what that means. Every other species in the coalition developed their military to fight external threats. We trained to defeat enemies who were different from us. Aliens with different bodies, different minds, different ways of thinking. He raised a manipulator arm and pointed at the cadets. Humans trained to fight beings exactly like themselves. Beings with the same creativity, the the same determination, the same capacity for both kindness and cruelty. For thousands of years, they sharpened their skills against the most challenging opponent possible. The old warrior began walking toward the exit, his lecture nearly complete. The Drexar were fierce. They were brutal. They conquered dozens of worlds before they met humanity. But Amy Shaw told me something that explains why they ultimately lost. He stopped at the door and turned back one final time. She said the Drexar were simply not as frightening as what humanity had already survived. They were not as clever as human generals. They were not as ruthless as human tyrants. They were not as creative as human warriors. Everything the Drexar could throw at humanity, humans had already seen before. From their own kind. Commander Crickstaw straightened his body and looked at each cadet in turn. You are young. You will have long careers ahead of you. You will serve the Coalition in peacetime and perhaps in war. And someday, you may find yourself standing beside humans or facing them across a battlefield. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. If you stand beside them, there is no better ally in the galaxy. They will fight for you. They will die for you. They will sacrifice everything to protect those they consider friends. The old warrior paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight of absolute certainty. But if you stand against them, remember everything I have told you today. Remember Sigma 7. Remember Call Done. Remember the Valiant Sun. Remember that humans do not fight like other species. They do not calculate acceptable losses. They do not surrender when the odds turn against them. He placed one manipulator arm on the door frame. They fight like they have everything to lose and nothing left to fear. And that, young ones, is the most terrifying thing in the universe. Crickstaw pressed a button and the door slid open. Bright light from the hallway spilled into the darkened assembly hall. He paused in the doorway and spoke his final words. If the Galactic Coalition is wise, we will never give humanity a reason to fight us. We will keep them as friends and partners and allies. We will remember what they did in the frontier wars and be grateful they did it for us, not against us. He began to walk through the door, then stopped. But if that day ever comes, if some foolish generation forgets the lessons of the past and threatens what humans love, then heaven help us all. Because I've seen what happens when humanity goes to war. And I promise you, that is not something any species should face willingly. The old commander disappeared through the doorway, leaving the cadets alone in the darkened hall. None of them moved. None of them spoke. They sat in silence, thinking about everything they had heard. Outside the academy, the sun was setting over Velthos Prime. In spaceports across the planet, human traders were closing their shops and heading home for dinner. Human families were tucking their children into bed. Human musicians were playing songs that made alien audiences cry. They looked so peaceful, so gentle, so harmless. But in the assembly hall of the War Academy, 100 young cadets had learned a truth they would never forget. Humanity was all of those things. And humanity was also something else. Something ancient and dark and infinitely patient. Something that slept quietly, waiting for the day it might be needed again. And when that day came, the galaxy would remember why humans were feared.